India looks set to finally take its place as a true economic superpower. The timing couldn't be better. Just as China is becoming less competitive, geopolitical tensions are mounting, and global companies are urgently diversifying their supply chains. India is making its move, and appears to be close to signing a mutually beneficial trade agreement with the USA. This significantly boosts the country's attractiveness, and it was already looking pretty good. India recently became the world's 5th largest economy. It's growing faster than China or any major country. It has a booming digital ecosystem, a young population, and more engineers graduating each year than almost any other country on Earth. But despite its immense potential, India has spent decades underperforming, held back by bureaucracy, red tape, inconsistent policies, and powerful domestic interests. It needs serious reform to overcome deep-rooted domestic challenges, and in this video, we're going to look at exactly what those are. But this story doesn't start with Modi, or even with China. It starts decades earlier. So let's step back, just briefly. In the decades after independence, India chose a socialist, centrally planned economic model. The government controlled everything: steel, railways, even airline tickets. The idea was to reduce dependence on foreign economies and build self-sufficiency. But in practice, it led to inefficiency, slow growth, and what became known as the license Raj, a nightmarish web of bureaucracy that made starting or expanding a business nearly impossible. For decades, the economy barely moved. Foreign investment was almost non-existent, businesses suffocated under red tape, and growth hovered around a disappointing 3% a year, not enough to lift a rapidly growing population out of poverty. Then came 1991, and things began to change as a financial crisis forced India's hand. The country was on the verge of default, with barely enough foreign reserves to cover 2 weeks of imports. In response, the government, led by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, did something drastic. They opened up the economy. Trade restrictions were lifted, foreign companies were allowed in, state-owned industries were privatized, and regulations were slashed. The results were transformational. Growth surged, foreign investors flooded in, and India became the world's outsourcing hub. Tech giants like Infosys and TCS exploded in size, and by the early 2000s, the country was on an unstoppable trajectory. Millions of people were lifted out of poverty. The middle class grew, and India was no longer an economic backwater. It was a rising global powerhouse. But fast forward to today, and the picture is more complicated. India is still growing at around 6 to 7% a year, making it the fastest growing major economy in the world. But unlike China, which built its rise on manufacturing, India's strength has been services and technology. The country has become a tech and digital powerhouse, with companies like Flipkart, Zomato, and Paytm leading a thriving startup scene. Digital payments have skyrocketed, with UPI revolutionizing how Indians buy and sell goods. And the country benefits from a youthful population, with over half of its 1.4 billion people under 30, providing a vast and growing workforce for the future. However, India's growth since the 2000s has not matched China's for several reasons. India continues to struggle with bureaucracy, land acquisition problems, and inconsistent policies that make large-scale manufacturing investment difficult. Foreign companies still find India's regulatory environment unpredictable, making it harder to set up large factories like in China. Consequently, India still faces a number of significant challenges that threaten to impede its growth, and if they aren't properly addressed, the country will probably fall short of its ambitions. The first major problem is jobs. Despite rapid economic growth, India simply isn't creating enough employment. Millions of young people enter the workforce every year, but the formal sector can't absorb them fast enough. Many end up working in low-paying informal jobs, or simply remain unemployed. The problem isn't just a lack of jobs, it's also a skills mismatch. Many graduates can't find work in their fields, while businesses struggle to hire workers with the right skills. Additionally, while there are probably some benefits and cultural reasons for one partner to stay at home, India's female workforce participation is also shockingly low, holding back its economic potential, especially given that women have become increasingly well-educated. More women than ever are earning degrees, but cultural norms, safety concerns, and a lack of childcare and flexible work options push many out of the labour market. This is a big loss. More generally, recent numbers tell a story of structural mismatches. Youth unemployment is at 33%, and while some rural areas have seen job growth, urban middle-class workers are struggling. High inflation has made things worse. Food and beverage prices have risen over 35% since 2020, eroding spending power and making even those with jobs feel poorer. In response, the Indian central bank has held interest rates at 6.5% to fight inflation, but this has made borrowing more expensive, further limiting job growth in key industries. Fixing this won't be easy. India needs major labour reforms to make hiring easier and reduce rigid employment laws that discourage businesses from expanding. Vocational training needs a huge push, so workers have the skills that industries actually need. And if India can bring more women into the workforce, it could unlock trillions of dollars in economic potential. The second challenge is manufacturing and investment. For years, India has wanted to become the next global manufacturing hub, a rival to China. And with China's labour costs rising, it should be India's moment to shine. Chinese labour costs are now several times higher than in India, making it far less competitive than it once was. At the same time, rising geopolitical tensions, particularly between China and the US, are pushing multinational companies to rethink and diversify their supply chains. But despite the hype around the Made in India strategy, progress has been slow. Foreign companies hesitate to invest because of bureaucratic delays, land acquisition problems, and unpredictable regulations. India's domestic businesses often prefer to lobby for protectionist policies rather than compete globally. The numbers are stark. Private investment as a share of GDP has fallen from 25% in 2008 to just 13% today. Meanwhile, cheap Chinese imports flood the market, making it cheaper to import than to manufacture locally. This is one reason why many large Indian companies are not expanding production at home. There simply aren't enough viable opportunities. To change this, India needs to cut red tape. Land acquisition laws must be streamlined, making it easier for companies to build factories. Tariffs should be lowered, making India more attractive for global supply chains. And infrastructure, roads, railways, power supply, needs massive investment to reduce costs and inefficiencies. If India can make these changes, it could position itself as the next great manufacturing power. If it can't, businesses will go elsewhere in the region. The third major issue is the financial sector. India's banking system remains weak, with rising defaults on loans, especially in unsecured lending like credit cards and small business loans. Public sector banks, which dominate the system, are inefficient and politically controlled, often giving out loans to politically connected businesses that never pay them back. This makes it harder for businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, to access credit, slowing investment and job creation. Just recently, some of India's largest private banks reported rising provisions for bad loans, signalling that defaults are increasing, particularly in personal loans and credit cards. The government has injected liquidity into the banking system to prevent a credit crunch, but fundamental problems remain. The solution is pretty clear. Public banks should be privatized to improve efficiency and remove political interference. The corporate bond market needs to expand, so businesses aren't completely dependent on banks for funding. And financial regulations need to ensure that bad loans don't keep piling up, destabilizing the system. But fixing these issues is easier said than done. As is usually the case, there are powerful, narrow vested interests that are strongly resisting potential disruption. Labour unions resist labour reforms, fearing job losses and reduced worker protections. Domestic manufacturers lobby against trade liberalization, preferring protectionist policies that shield them from competition rather than pushing them to innovate. And state-owned banks are deeply tied to politics, with governments using them for loan waivers and politically motivated lending, making privatization difficult. Put simply, vested interests in India are putting its massive economic opportunity at risk, even though that opportunity could lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. If the reforms are delayed, then growth will slow and investment could dry up. But if the country takes bold steps now, it could probably deliver the 8% plus growth target for many years. Why do I think that such remarkable growth is likely? Well, India should be a true global economic powerhouse given its size alone. And with the world's youngest workforce, India has an enormous demographic advantage. If it can create enough jobs and train workers in the right skills, consumer spending and productivity will skyrocket. At the same time, with global manufacturers looking for alternatives to China, India has a golden opportunity to become the next big manufacturing hub, but it needs to cut red tape and improve infrastructure to fully capitalize on it. Meanwhile, its booming digital economy and financial sector modernization could unlock trillions in new investment, helping businesses grow and fueling long-term expansion. So in conclusion, India has all the right ingredients to achieve years of strong economic growth, a massive market, a well-educated labor force, and rising global influence. The question is whether the government will push through the critical reforms needed to unlock this potential. If it does, India could achieve very significant sustainable growth for decades, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and securing its place as one of the world's leading economic superpowers. But that won't happen by accident. Tough choices need to be made and powerful domestic interests need to be confronted. Will Modi make the first steps? Hard to tell. In the past, he has shown himself to be capable of making bold moves, but has also been reluctant to take on deeply entrenched domestic interests when faced with strong resistance. However, these reforms are essential and potentially transformative. And Modi has positioned himself as a leader who wants India to become a developed economy by the centenary of independence in 2047. If he really does want to secure his place in history, then he needs to push through the reforms. A link to the next video should be on your screen now. Just click to keep watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and follow. Thanks for watching.